Imagine you're on a bus trip. You're in the middle of nowhere in the dark, and suddenly the bus just stops. Welcome to Psychomanteum. I'm Karen Shaw. Here we venture into the other side of the mirror. Paranormal mysteries, scary stories, and all things supernatural. If that sounds like your jam, and if you like what you hear, please drop a like so we can grow. Now, gather round, children. A few years ago, my sister, who had just had her first baby, called and asked me to come down to the town where she lived and help her for the summer. I was on summer break from college, and she even said she'd pay me, so naturally I jumped at the chance to help with my adorable new nephew and fatten my wallet. There was only one problem. I lived north of the Finger Lakes in New York State, and my sister was about 4 hours' drive south in a rural town. Sure, I had my driver's license, but my mom had to work, so she needed the car. That left only one option: the bus. Now, the bus didn't actually go to my sister's town, but the bus from my town to NYC passed through a city a little more than half an hour away from my sister's town, so my brother-in-law could come and pick me up. Luckily, the cheapest fare left the station in the evening, so my mom could finish work and drop me in plenty of time to catch the bus. I packed my suitcase, my mom drove me to the station, and I boarded the bus. I hadn't been on anything but a city bus, and I had to admit, this one was kind of nice. There was even a bathroom in the back, although the bus driver, a middle-aged woman who said her name was Linda, asked us not to use it for anything except pee if we could help it, because she said it could get smelly. I had a bunch of books loaded on my Kindle app, and I barely noticed the first couple of hours passing by, except to look up from my phone every so often to check out the scenery. People often think New York State is just the city, but that's not the case. Upstate New York is actually really green and rural for the most part, and the route wound around and over rolling hills covered in thick forest and wide fields. The verge was dotted with wildflowers in purple, blue, yellow, and white, and there are plenty of scenic bridges over beautiful rivers and streams. It was one of those times that I was looking out the window and was about to go back to my book when all of a sudden the bus started to jerk and slow down. I peered out the window to see what was causing the slowdown, but all I could see was smoke billowing from the front of the bus. The bus driver brought the bus to a stop on the side of the road and announced that we were having mechanical troubles, as if we couldn't figure that out. She said she would radio for another bus, but it would probably be a few hours before they could get there. I quickly texted my sister to let her know we would be late, but when the text wouldn't deliver, I realized we had no service. I glanced around the bus, and I heard the other passengers complaining about the same thing. Good thing the bus company had radios, I guess. I hated to worry my sister, but I figured she'd realize something had happened when she checked my progress on Find My and would probably call the bus company. The bus driver got back on the speaker and told us she was going to have to turn off the AC to save power. I shook off my worries and dove back into my book, but it started to get hot in the bus. That was tolerable, but as the bus got hotter, the bus got smellier. It wasn't the people. There weren't that many people on board, but the bathroom in the back got stinkier and stinkier as the temperature rose. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up to leave, and I wasn't the only one. Pretty soon there was a line to exit the bus. The bus driver opened the door and we flooded out. It was then I noticed there were 12 passengers, including me. I'm not a superstitious person, but the fact that with the bus driver we made 13 gave me a little pause. Still, I guess we'd already had our bad luck. Where we got off, there were huge logs used as guardrails at the side of the road, and beyond that was a small clearing big enough to hold maybe 5 cars. Early June in New York means it doesn't get full dark until after 9, but twilight was setting in. Further past the clearing, the trees were so thick it already looked dark in there. I hadn't had a chance to examine my fellow passengers before, but as people collected in the clearing and we started to chat, I discovered we were a varied bunch. There were 2 elderly black ladies who shared they were going on a spiritual retreat, a short young guy who from my high school Spanish was from Guatemala, 3 girls my age, 1 black, 2 white, headed for a friend's house in the Bronx, a middle-aged Asian woman wearing hiking shorts with hiking poles stuck in her pack, 2 German men, 1 with brown hair and 1 blonde, traveling back from Niagara Falls, our bus driver Linda, a young black couple, and me. We all spilled into the clearing. Somebody must mow the grass here occasionally because it wasn't much higher than the bottom of my calf. We stood around for a while, just leaning on the log divider, and then the German guys went into the tree line and dug out a long fallen log for the older ladies to sit on. Then they went back, and after several minutes, brought another, fatter log and sat down themselves. It was really starting to get dark now. The girls next to me discussed getting back on the bus, but decided it was probably still too smelly and put their packs on the ground. The Guatemalan guy must have been getting cold because he brought out some deadfall branches from the forest and suggested a fire. The bus driver frowned at him. Maybe she wanted to protest. Who knows if building a fire here was legal, but it was getting chilly. Soon everybody joined in, ripping out the grass in the middle of the clearing, getting rocks for a fire break, and gathering kindling and breaking up larger branches. The Asian woman, whose name turned out to be Hannah, pulled out a lighter from her pack, and pretty soon we had a fire going. The sight of the flames really raised our spirits. We dropped onto the ground or a log and dug through our bags to share snacks. I'd been bummed about the breakdown, but with the fire warming my face and flickering flames dancing in front of me, it suddenly felt like an adventure. Me and the 3 college girls, Karina, Laurel, and Olivia, exchanged names and started talking about common experiences. After a while, though, we sort of sunk into our own thoughts, just sitting there, watching the fire. All of a sudden, Linda, the bus driver, asked where Hannah had gone. Esther, one of the elderly black ladies, said Hannah had gone into the woods to go to the bathroom. Now, I haven't camped much and prefer a bathroom, but I couldn't blame her for preferring the woods to that stinky bathroom on the bus. But then Esther said it had been a while. Benno, the dark-haired German, suggested she might have gotten turned around in the dark. His companion Lucas put forth the idea that if she didn't return in a few minutes, maybe we should look for her. We all agreed. Although the mood had been upbeat before, now the darkness at the edge of the clearing seemed to push back against the light of the fire. I must not have been the only one to feel that way, because Jorge, the Guatemalan guy, added a bunch more wood to the flames. The young black couple, Jay and Keisha, joined in. The flames rose high, sparks rising into the air, but it didn't dispel the growing feeling of unease. Finally, when Hannah hadn't shown up after several long minutes, Benno stood up, brushed off his jeans, and said he was going to go look for her. I'm not going to lie, I was nervous to go into the woods, but I needed to move, hoping being active would banish my strange feeling of dread, so I stood up and joined them. Pretty much everyone except Esther and her friend Shirley turned on their phone flashlights and headed into the trees. The brush was thick, and I couldn't help worrying about poison ivy as leaves scraped against my forearms and calves. We searched for a while, calling Hannah's name, but after about 10 minutes, Benno called out to everyone that if we went much further, we might get lost ourselves, and we headed back. As we turned around, I was glad there were other people behind me, because the idea of having the dark woods at my back made the hairs on my nape stand up. The sight of the fire was welcome, and I walked up and started warming my face and back. I hadn't realized how chilled I'd gotten. My clothes were damp, with dew, I guess. Benno and Lucas came back out of the darkness, and I waited for the others. But only Linda emerged. Where was everyone? I listened to see if I could hear the crunching footsteps of people in the woods, but it was quiet. In fact, it was strangely quiet. Earlier you could hear crickets and frogs and the like, but now nothing. Even the wind had died down. I looked around the clearing at the 6 remaining people and saw the same alarm reflected in their eyes. We all just stared at each other, the fire making the whites of our eyes seem unnaturally large, or maybe our eyes were really that round with fear. I thought my heart couldn't beat any harder. until a scream came from the woods. Benno and Lucas took off, with Linda and me close behind. We stumbled through the dark trees in the direction of the scream. The terrain in this area was more rugged, and the trees were almost on top of each other. Spider webs clung to my exposed skin, and branches whipped my cheeks. After what seemed like forever, but was probably under 5 minutes, Benno stopped. Linda and I almost ran into him. I thought he might be going to say we should stop looking, but his flashlight was still aimed in front of him, and I followed the beam to what had made him stop. Lying in a heap in a rocky depression 3 feet below us were the other 7 people from the bus. Even Hannah was there. None of them were moving. I wanted to ask if they were alive, but I couldn't get enough air to speak. Benno, Lucas, and Linda picked their way down into the hollow and checked their pulses. To our relief, everyone was alive, just unconscious. I came down, fell to my knees, and shook Laurel, Karina, and Olivia. The hollow must have been filled with spiders, because I felt sticky webs all over my exposed skin, and the girls were also covered. I'm scared of spiders, but I couldn't even worry about that at the moment. I won't deny my skin was crawling, and I kept thinking I was feeling one on me, but that was the least of our problems. At first, the passengers in the hollow wouldn't wake up. It was almost like they were drugged. Linda managed to wake Jorge and then moved on to Hannah. Only Jay and Keisha wouldn't wake up. Benno and Lucas each took one of them, and we started back to the clearing with those 2 in front carrying the unconscious pair over their shoulders. I was next, but the group who had been in the hollow were having trouble walking, seeming to be unable to lift their feet, like they had lost the circulation in them. I was pretty much dragging Laurel and Olivia. Karina and Hannah were leaning on each other, and last in line, Linda helped Jorge. He seemed really out of it, so they weren't doing much better than Karina and Hannah. We had to stop every so often and let the last 2 pairs catch up. The whole time, I couldn't stop wondering what had happened. How had they ended up like that? Was there someone or something out in the woods? And if there were, what had they done to the others to leave them in that state? I tried to ask, but it seemed to be hard for them to talk because they just kept shaking their heads. And then the noises started. It was just rustling in the distance at first and snapping twigs. But then we heard a sort of hissing growl. I had never heard anything like it. We stopped and panned our phones around, trying to see what was making the noises. But as the sounds grew closer, we started moving again, picking up the pace as best we could, almost running. We were all panting like crazy as we pushed forward. My heart was racing. I hardly noticed the smacking of branches against my face and body, and the pain of straining to tow 2 people with me. Finally, we burst into the clearing and saw the fire and the dark, reassuring shape of the bus behind it. My muscles were burning, and I dropped onto the ground near the fire in relief. Benno and Lucas had already laid the people they were carrying down and were trying to wake them as Esther and Shirley came forward to offer water, asking what had happened. But no one could answer them. The searchers didn't know, and the people who had been unconscious didn't remember. Keisha groaned and came around, and at last Jay did too. After we told the ladies how we found them, Shirley suggested that maybe someone had hit them over the head. But Laurel said she had a headache, but more like a hangover than from being hit, and the others agreed. Then Shirley suggested maybe they'd drunk something drugged. But Hannah said she'd only drunk from her own water bottle she'd filled at home, and some of the others said they hadn't drunk anything at all since leaving. Shirley then said we should study them for needle marks. It didn't take more than a few minutes to discover they all had 2 red circular marks that looked like something you'd see from a vampire movie, except further apart. Just as we made this discovery, we started hearing the rustling and cracking again, this time much closer. Then That strange growling hiss joined the rustling. We pointed our phone flashlights at the trees, but couldn't see anything. When another growling hiss and another sounded from different directions, we had had enough. We scrambled back to the bus and clambered on board. As soon as everyone was inside, Linda closed the door. Now the growling was so loud we could hear it on the bus. We all lined up at the windows facing the clearing, straining to see what would come out. We could see some trees shake, but the fire was little more than red coals by now, and it was hard to see. We stood there staring at the clearing, not daring to look away in the minutes that dragged past. Then, all of a sudden, the last bit of flame from the fire died. In the dim light of the coals, I almost thought I could make out dark shapes, the size of St. Bernards, come out of the trees and dart past the fire. But this far from the city, the night is pitch black, and I couldn't be sure I'd actually seen anything until something hit the bus. The dull thud of a heavy body of some kind slamming onto the bus made us all jump, and someone let out a little shriek. I was so scared my heart actually hurt as it beat. Still, I had to know what was out there. I pulled out my phone to use the flashlight, but the bus's windows were tinted, and all I could see was my own terrified face reflected back at me. Maybe whatever was out there could see the light, though, because almost as soon as I turned it on, something slammed into my window. I jumped back. A bunch of people screamed, and several yelled to turn it off, but I didn't need anyone to tell me that. I shut off the flashlight. Now, the only light was the strip of lights illuminating the floor of the bus, and some red lights near the ceiling. More bodies hit the bus. Then the scrabbling began. The dry sound of something sharp scratching the outside of the bus raised the hair on the back of my neck. I got goosebumps all down my arms. The sounds got louder and more insistent, changing from scratching to more like scraping. Between the scraping, the growling, and the vibrations I could feel, I was sure whatever was out there was going to get in any second. I had no way of knowing if the creatures outside were what attacked the other passengers earlier, but it seemed likely, and I didn't want to imagine fighting something with fangs that big, or that was able to incapacitate so many people, one as tall as 6 feet. I felt a bit of relief as the sounds moved away from me, but a millisecond later my heart jumped into my throat as I realized that though the scraping had moved away from me, it was now centered at the door. The creatures were trying so hard to get in now that the bus was actually rocking. Then a loud honk made me scream. The edge of a headlight beam briefly highlighted long limbs and brown speckled hair, and then the dark shapes that had been attacking the bus hurtled to the tree line and disappeared into the woods. I turned to see the source of our rescue and saw another bus labeled with the iconic logo of the bus company. I sagged onto a seat, my knees rubbery with relief. A minute later, a hearty knock came on the door, and Linda opened it to a friendly-looking, broad-faced bus driver. "Heard you had a rough night," he said with a smile. Linda let out a gusty sigh. "You have no idea." Everyone quickly lined up to exit the bus. After what had happened, we couldn't get out of there fast enough. As I stood up, my AirPods fell out of my pocket and under the seat, and I had to get down to get them, making me last in line. Unwilling to walk even a few feet in the dark after what had happened, I turned on my phone flashlight again. As I stepped down onto the gravel beside the road, I got a good look at the door in the flashlight's beam. The gleaming paintwork of the early evening had disappeared, and in its place were large gashes in a pattern my brain knew very well. Claw marks. The rest of the trip on the bus was a blur. My brother-in-law was waiting at the station, and I spent a happy summer with my sister's family. Her new son was a delight, and her new home was beautiful. But no matter how lovely a summer evening appeared, I never stayed out after dark. And when it was time to take the bus home, I made sure to take the one that left the station first thing in the morning. That'll make you rethink a camping trip in the Finger Lakes. So, what do you think our MC ran into out in the woods? Have you ever taken a bus trip between cities or gotten lost in the woods? Comment below. We'd love to hear about it. Thanks for listening. Please drop us a like and subscribe. In the following days, look for more stories, both true and fictional, and explorations of all things creepy and unexplained. If you have a story to share, drop an email to the address in the description. Until next time, think twice before you look behind you in the mirror. There may be something on the other side.